Awesome. Well, welcome everyone. Hi, it's so good to have you here with me. My name is Natalie Nixon. I am the CEO and founder of Figure Eight Thinking, where I'm a creativity strategist and I advise companies and leaders on new ways to think about their futures, specifically through the lenses of wonder, rigor, and foresight. And I'm really excited to be joined today by Nancy Marmolejo, who is the founder and CEO of Talent and Genius. And before I invite Nancy to introduce herself and share a bit more about how she got into this work, and then we'll get into our conversation, I just want to share out that the way Nancy and I met was we were both part of a cohort that was led and facilitated by the dynamic visual strategic visual thinker. I don't know how best to explain him, Simon Bowen. And we'll add a link to Simon Bowen's work in case any of you are interested in getting better at visualizing your value proposition in your work. Go to simonbowen.me. He's an Australian based in Australia, and we learned so much from him. And fortunately, we're able to meet and connect through that learning experience. So Nancy, welcome, welcome, welcome. So happy to have you with us. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. I'm glad that you mentioned Simon Bowen because I remember when we were in that cohort together, and as soon as you started to talk, I said, "She's my people." I felt this resonance with you, Natalie. It's like she's creative, she's strategic, I mean, all the things. So I'm really happy to be here. I feel like we're so aligned.
We are very much aligned. And speaking of that alignment, would you, in your own words, share more about what you do for people, how you help people through talent and genius, and then how you got to this work?
Sure. On my LinkedIn profile, it says helping organizations walk their DEI talk. What we do in my firm is we look at leadership development, we look at communication skills, we look at the DISC assessment, all of these tools that help people get along better. But we do everything through a DEI lens. We test everything on diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, justice, how who's feeling included, who's not feeling included, and why, and what can we do in our interpersonal conversations and our own behaviors to help close that gap.
Nice. And what brought you to this work? If you give us kind of the sound bite version of your background and how you started Talent and Genius.
A soundbite version is going to be tough because it started when I was a little kid playing with my dolls.
Okay.
But then I
Okay.
ended up I was an educator for many years. I was a Spanish bilingual educator. I developed curriculum that was all about who's not included in the curriculum, who's not being reflected, a discussion we're still having today, decades later. And then when I started my work, I really want to make sure that my years of study around interpersonal relationships, emotional intelligence, as well as communication are reflected in what I do. So we do
Mhm.
training, coaching, keynotes, leadership development, um, all kinds of fun stuff.
Awesome. Well, it's good to have you here. And I'd love your perspectives on why this work of inclusion is particularly prescient and relevant and important today, now more than ever. My first question for you is if you would discuss the role of what we call EI or emotional intelligence in diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. What's the role of EI in all of that?
Sure. Emotional intelligence, sometimes I call it EQ, EI. There's all these different acronyms that we use. So, really, the first piece of this is for us to have an understanding of an experience outside of ourselves. And no
Hmm.
matter where you are in the equation, we all have to have that element of empathy. It all starts there, being able to understand that somebody's experience has been different than yours. Somebody's life path might have had more challenges, or somebody's life path might have instilled in them this lack of awareness or the lack of being able to see what other people are going through. There's just this basic understanding of everyone on a human level. We have to start there. We have to start there because that will to address defensiveness, or when people start really becoming divisive, that empathy brings us together.
Are there particular situations where that EQ gets sparked more than others? Are there particular moments in our lives or situationally on the job where you have found through your experience that EQ becomes a real um, well from us to draw from?
I think it comes out a lot in leadership and in managing and working with others, especially working in teams. You have a couple of people who they might say, we just don't get along. We just don't mix. And then once you start to understand who each other is on just unpack, like, who are you under the surface? Who are you beyond the job title? How did you get to where you are? Or even I use the DISC assessment a lot. We understand, oh, you don't, it's not that you don't like me, you just have a different style than I do. So it's that the more information we can get out about ourselves and each other, the better it makes us connect.
Well, I really like the way you just now said, who are you beyond the job title? Because I've been sharing out a lot of my work that work is increasingly becoming inside out work, and that the best companies, teams, and organizations will be the ones that are much more curious about our personal development, who we are outside of the job. In fact, I think that the COVID-19 pandemic has really accelerated that need for inside out work because I'm right here in my home office, so we already are seeing some blurred boundaries just by virtual work, right? So I really agree with that perspective that we've got to understand who we are beyond the job title. I think that it really helps to spike productivity when people are curious about us as on a personal level.
True. And I take teams and groups and individuals through a process I call Deep Genius, where we learn about not just what are some of the things you know how to do well, but what are the innate strengths you have? What are some of the life experiences you have had that add to that? A really interesting group at Microsoft, there was this one person, it turned out she had been a circus performer. And,
Wow.
putting that on top of her work in tech, I just ask everyone, okay, what do you see possible with her? What do you understand better? What do you see as a conversation you can now have that you never had before? Not that you have to talk about being a circus performer, but just that truly out of the box, very different kind of world life experience. It tells you a little something about who that person is and what they bring to the table.
And what do you call that process?
I call it deep genius.
Deep genius. Well, what I love about what it sounds like what that process is about is getting to know each other through asking questions. And one of the intersections in our work, I would say, Nancy, is that I have been known to say that the precursor to empathy is curiosity, right? You actually cannot, excuse me, you cannot empathize with the soul until you have the ability to ask a new and different question, until you're curious about why do they do it that way and not our way? How come? Why do they sit over there and not over here with us? Why? So empathy doesn't just fall down from the sky. It actually, from my perspective, it starts with knowing how, being interested in asking new and different sorts of questions, which is learned behavior. It's not something that we can necessarily say it's going to happen automatically. What do you think about that?
I agree with you 100%. It is learned behavior. You have to teach people to ask questions. You have to teach people to listen. I have been, part of a DEI initiative of a large organization that I work with. It's all about interpersonal communication skills. We spent workshops doing effective communication, open-ended questions, being in that place of curiosity, active listening, because until you can get to that place. And also, I'll add one other thing. In the corporate circles, I call it self-regulation, and in
Hmm.
the outside, in the regular world, I might call it mindfulness or some sort of a
Ah,
personal self-care practice. But you really have to be able to hold that level of patience because you know whether we call it mindfulness, self-regulation, what have you, it's the ability to stay in that place of calm within yourself so that things don't rattle you as much. Like, how can you address a difficult conversation? How can you address a hot button topic and remain, not that you're going to be perfect, but just try to remain in that place of centeredness and groundedness? I think that's essential.
yeah, I agree with you. And if we could just unpack why did you decide to use different language in the corporate environment? I'm sure that was very intentional. Why did you decide to use self-regulation versus mindfulness?
Just trying to keep it a little more neutral, scientific, as opposed to somebody going, I'm not doing that thing. I'm not sitting on a pillow and doing this. I'm not telling you to sit on a pillow and do this. I'm just saying, like, take a few deep breaths. So trying to find like neutral language. And also, I just have to say, I modify my vocabulary for the group I'm with. What's the way that you're going to hear what I'm saying without you suddenly crossing your arms saying, no, 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 I'm not going there. So I have to word things in a way that people will be receptive. So in some places I say self-regulation, and in other places I might say well-being, self-care, mindfulness, and it just depends on the culture of the organization I'm working
Well,
in.
I think that's very smart, and I think that's very meta. You are reading the crowd. You're being attuned to where people are, so that uh, communication will be optimal. Because as soon as we start to shut down because of our assumptions, then we're not gonna grow. We're not gonna be able to receive the lessons that are inherent in that process. So it makes complete sense to me. Total sense.
Yeah, yeah. If I'm working with aerospace engineers, I say self-regulation. If I'm working with nonprofits and schools, I say something else. So it just depends.
Makes sense. So I've noticed that the letter B, as in boy, has been added on to DEI practitioners' work. And the B stands for belonging, right? So it's diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. What does belonging look like in today's workplace?
Belonging is, we talk a lot now about psychological safety. Am I safe to ask questions? Am I safe to dissent with an opinion? Am I safe to bring my ideas without being made fun of? Or am I, is this a place where I can be safe bringing my contributions? That's a big part of belonging. There was a great quote, and a couple of people have said this, but I'm going to credit the University of Michigan's chief diversity officer, Robert Sellers, with this one. And he said, diversity is where everyone's invited to the party. Inclusion means that everybody gets to contribute to the playlist. Equity means that everyone has the opportunity to dance and to experience the music. And then what I add in is belonging means you could bring all your true self to the dance floor without fear of retribution or retaliation. Like you could be Napoleon Dynamite or Megan the Stallion, and you are okay there. You
Yeah,
belong. So it's that, like, can I just bring myself? Can I just be the dork that I am, or the cool person that I am? Whoever you are, let me be that person, and I belong.
nice. That's a really helpful analogy. That's super helpful. So I know you have a few questions for me, Nancy, as well. And I want to give you the chance to intersperse your questions with my questions. If you want to ask one to me now, great. If you don't, I can ask another question to you.
Yeah, I'm always curious to see how the elements of belonging and diversity, equity, inclusion, or even emotional intelligence fit into the work you do. I'm always curious to see what it looks like in different from different
Mm.
practitioners.
Well, and before I answer that, I want to encourage anyone who's tuned in to share a comment, a question for Nancy into the chat, and Morgan, my project manager, will be sure to surface that, and we'll be sure to get your question noticed and responded to. So I think in my work as a creativity strategist, especially since you've talked about belonging, that's a big part of the creative process. And also, I would say equity. I have this framework I developed called CQ. So we know that IQ is when we talk about intellectual intelligence, and EQ is emotional intelligence, and CQ is a term I coined in order to reference the need for us to show up to work not just from the chin up, which is IQ, and not just from the heart up, but from the gut up. I'm very interested in the ways that our intuition and the fact that we are sentient beings can be recognized as an important part of productivity and work. And when I talk to a lot of corporate audiences about intuition, notably, it's not something we talk about, right? We don't touch intuition in business school, in law school, in medical school. It's not part of the curricula. However, every successful leader I've ever worked with, interviewed for my book, they all reference the role of intuition in their strategic decision making process. So, inclusivity for me is all about really incorporating all of the dimensions of ourselves so that we can show up in our most productive, meaningful ways, and work can be super purpose driven. Because if we're only asked to show up in one narrow dimension of how we exist, we probably won't connect as well with others. The work won't be as inspiring to us. At the end of the day, the way I view a lot of your work is that it's about being seen and heard, and building a creative capacity of an individual, building the creative capacity of an organization ultimately requires that we see and hear people on all those levels. So that example you gave of your clients at Microsoft, and one of the members has training and experience in the circus. That's super important because there are certain skill sets that person developed over time to work in a circus. Everything from the discipline that it took to be at that level of, I don't know what that person did in the circus. There's lots of different roles a person can play, but there's wonder and rigor, right? That's involved in the cultivation of that skill set. But all of a sudden, we now see that person differently. We understand that we could suss out a skill set that could be super important for a project. And we connect in a much more meaningful way. So those are the ways that inclusion and equity show up. And sorry, the reason I brought up my CQ framework is that it's a series of concentric circles. And the basic idea is that the way we build our creative quotient, it starts with gratitude, which then leads to humility, which then leads to curiosity. Curiosity then leads to empathy, as we've already discussed, and empathy hopefully leads to equitable action. So that's also kind of this parallel to your work. So those are the ways I see the intersection, the kind of the Venn diagram between my work as a creativity strategist and all the work that you're doing at Talent and Genius.
I love that. And as you were talking about CQ and giving those examples, you made me realize that another piece of belonging is honoring the sources of intelligence and wisdom. So if somebody is saying an intuitive inclination, it's, a gut, I have a gut feeling. Well, we have this massive nerves in our guts that some people call a brain. And we tend to, I like to look before Western, scientific thought, and cultures from thousands of years ago have named areas of the body that hold intelligence, have honored different ways that intelligence shows up. When I was an educator all those years ago, I was fascinated with the work of Howard Gardner from Harvard School of Education. He did the multiple intelligences. Some people are body intelligent. Some people are kind of athletic intelligence. Some people are interpersonal intelligence. Some people have of course, the logical, mathematical intelligence, linguistic intelligence, and it's valuable and it's valued. And the piece of belonging is to honor the many paths to an answer. It's not just one. It's not just from this particular line of thinking, but for some people, it's a whole body experience. And
Nancy,
that's something I admire.
I want to make sure we share that source. Howard Gardner, Gardner.
Yes, yes.
Okay, we'll put that like that. That's awesome. Who talked about multiple intelligences? I love that. I had not heard of Howard Gardner, so I'll definitely look into that work. Um, awesome. Yeah, that what you're that nerve network in our gut is connected to the vagus nerve, right? Which is the longest cranial nerve that extends from our medulla oblongata down through our heart into our guts. And we say things like, "My gut is telling me." It really is. We actually have a great question from one of our attendees. We have two great questions. So let's get to those two questions. So one comes from Tim Whitley, who is an HR technology wizard. Tim says, Natalie talks a lot about asking good questions. What are creative questions you can ask organizational leaders to help them understand the benefits of DEIB for both their employees and their long term success? Love that question. Any thoughts on that, Nancy?
Oh, thank you, Tim, for the question. Let me read it because I'm actually kind of like I have to read the question as well as hear it. So, what are creative questions you can ask organizational leaders to help them understand benefits? I think the most important thing is, as Natalie has said, is to stay curious. So, we're asking open-ended questions. What would success look like? What would the ideal situation, what do we want to see in our people, what do we want to see in our organization? And so the best place to start is on that higher level visionary area where we can just ask people like, what is the ideal, without asking a yes or no type of question, keeping it, and how would that look, how would that play out, how would that feel, going into the emotional state of it, into like, what is it, I always tell people, is like, let's do the Monday morning test. Like, what does this feel like Monday morning? Does it feel real? Is it the inner, it's not some big policy level that gets put on a shelf and nobody actually pays attention to it. It's in those interactions. So I would start there and just asking, what would it look like, what would it sound like, what would it feel like, what would it look like around this place?
Okay, thanks for that, Nancy. We have another great question from Grant Rawdon, who's the founder and CEO of Westcott Financial Advisors. So Grant at says, there's a new, less desirable DEI concept that we're seeing in the corporate world, quote, DEI fatigue. Is belonging the concept that can re-energize DEI and provide a point of view, a perspective for those who have classified DEI as a political objective? Super important
Oh,
question, Grant, because there is definitely that critique and pushback against DEI. Thank you for that question.
that's a big one to unpack, Grant. Thank you so much for the question. And I think the part of it is to, again, to go into this place of, I would just ask people like, describe what you mean by fatigue. I need to unpack what are you saying? Because for some people, what it is, they might be calling it fatigue, but really what it is it's resistance. It's resistance to change. It's resistance. It's that defensiveness. I don't like DEI because it's going to make me wrong. I don't like DEI because it's just calling out, and once again, I'm the bad guy, or whatever it is. I mean, people have different narratives that become engaged around DEI. Um, you know, there was a song, Elvis Costello sang long ago, "What's so funny about peace, love, and understanding?" And you just get to this place of like, belonging is making sure everyone's feeling included. And yeah, it gets a little messy and there's some discomfort and it's a growing pain. But anytime anybody brings up the concept of DEI fatigue, I think that just means that we need to go into a conversation and ask some open-ended questions about what is it that you are associating with that? What is it that you could be possibly scared of? Or what are you unsure about? So I look at that as more of a fear-based type of reaction, and it's just a place where healing needs to come in. And healing is through more conversation and just, again, this empathy and emotional intelligence.
Thank you for that question, Grant. It's a really important question. I tried to write thank you into the chat, but I'm getting a message that there's something wrong with the event. Morgan, let me know if we're all good on the actual event page. I hope that we are. But I appreciate both of those questions. Thank you so much.
Can I add one more thing?
Yes.
This all takes patience. The last 3 years, it was like, boom, if you've never heard of DEI, now you have, and here it is. And there are people who are like overwhelmed because it's like, wait, I've never had to deal with this before. So there's a certain amount of adjustment. So let's just understand that this is a long game. This isn't
Mhm.
some little thing that we're just going to like have a workshop and it's cured and let's go back to the way it was. This is ongoing growth, and that's where the self-regulation, the personal practices, the personal grounding and centeredness that you need to do on a daily basis to be able to handle change without it becoming this huge place of resistance. So I think that's something that is just a call for all of us.
Yeah, and I do think it's noteworthy that Grant referenced that it does become politicized. And the way you're answering this, you're not tapping into the politicization parts of it so much as the need for kind of shifting our mental models, which ultimately could be political. But yeah, thank you for that. We're getting close to the end of our time. This went really quickly. Another question I have for you, Nancy, is how do wonder and rigor show up in DEIB? And of course, I'd like to get your perspective on that because the way I define creativity is that it's our ability to toggle between wonder and rigor to solve problems and generate meaning and produce novel value. And wonder is curiosity and audacity and awe, and rigor is discipline and focus and time on task. So, how do wonder and rigor show up in DEIB?
Oh, I love this question. Well, first of all, let's just say stay curious. Stay curious. There's so many things that we can stay curious about. I think one of the things that we need to stay curious about is the concept of intersectionality. Where do we have power? In what spaces do we have power? And what spaces do we not? And that can shift. You can, it's every one of us can step into a situation where we have more agency. It's the type of power we have. Maybe it's social power, maybe it's political power, maybe it's institutional power. We have to be aware of that. Another thing is that having the curiosity about yourself, where you might be taking things personally. If you've ever read this book called The Four Agreements by Don Miguel Ruiz, the first of the four agreements is don't take things personally. And so that gives us the opportunity to step outside of ourselves. And that's a real key piece of empathy as well. On the rigor part of it, how the practice having difficult conversations, that is something people want to avoid. Ghosting, or like, I just don't want, I'll just avoid it, it'll fix itself. The act of having a difficult conversation is one of the most profound personal growth experiences you could ever have, because it's not as scary as you think it is once you have the right approach. As far as frameworks are concerned, one of the things I do with the DISC assessment is we also have an emotional intelligence component called Agile EQ. And that just helps people to see some of their strengths and some of their opportunities. And it's very structured in a framework that everybody has the same vocabulary and everybody has the kind of the same reference points. Makes it a little bit easier for an organization to move in that direction when we're all coming from the same source of vocabulary and structure. So I would recommend those elements for wonder and rigor applications.
Awesome. Very, very true. We want to share one more time where people can learn more about Nancy's work. Just go to talentandgenius.com. Did I get that correctly, Nancy?
That is correct. Contact me. I'm here on LinkedIn as well. I'm sure I'm going to get tagged in one of these things. And, we have consulting and training, keynote speaking, certified with the DISC assessment. Just really love being a part of any kind of positive change that organizations are moving towards.
Awesome. Well, let's conclude by I'll ask you to share how you are building wonder and how you're building rigor in your life right now, and I'll share quickly, and then we're gonna wrap things up for today.
My best thing right now is to be in nature as much as possible. And we had this amazing rainy winter here in the Bay Area, and the wildflowers this spring have been amazing. And I get inspiration being out in nature. So that is where I build wonder and rigor into my whole life.
Okay, awesome. For me, right now it's through swimming. I'm preparing for a swimming vacation in Crete, Greece, and I've had to get in a lot more laps than I typically do. I don't know if I'm totally ready, but you're never 100% ready. It's for me, it's the experience. It's a great company, FYI, called Swim Trek. I'll let everyone know how it is, but it's swimming for me in the water. The ocean is a place of wonder. Swimming both simultaneously after I swim, I feel both energized and calm. So there's the rigor of, practicing my technique so that I can swim for endurance, not speed for me, but endurance. And then just the beauty of being in a new location. So that's how I'm experiencing it lately. All right. So thank you so much, Nancy Marmolejo, the CEO and founder of talentandgenius.com. And thank you, everyone, for joining us. Thank you so much for the questions that we received today from Tim Whitley and Grant Rodden. And we hope that you'll share this out and stay in touch with us. Thank you so much. Bye.